Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dimension Fold. Today I have a good friend of mine, Mark Joseph Young, and it's kind of funny because we've done lots of projects together, but we've never actually spoken face to face before. So this is a nice, kind of a cool thing.
Yeah,
welcome, Mark.
All of our information about each other is pretty much based on emails and pictures. And of course,
exactly.
And of course that we've read each other's books.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, Mark, how many books has it been, Mark? How many books do you have? Like 10?
Well, okay, let's say like 10. I think it's
like
closer
10.
to 20, but it depends on how you count them, because I am currently working on the 14th novel, but they get published serialized on the internet.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and are your novels available on your main website?
Yes, you go to mjyoung.net and find the link for stories, and you can get to the first one is called Verse 3, Chapter 1, and the others are all linked from there.
Nice. So I'll put a link up underneath here as well. So mjyoung.net.
Yes.
So today, one of your books that I found most interesting was this time travel book that you wrote, and obviously, time travel is a fascinating topic. And also, I really like time travel movies, and you've kind of taken those kind of two separate ideas, and you kind of mash them together. So it's a book about time travel theory, but also using Hollywood films as examples, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, I guess you could put it that way. The weird thing, I suppose, is back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I can't put a thumb on it, but I got asked to help write a role-playing game called Multiverser. And the thing about Multiverser is absolutely everything is possible. And that means that time travel is possible. And if time travel is possible, we were going to have to explain to our referees how to handle it. Excuse me. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to handle time travel. And I watched a lot of time travel movies. And I spotted things that I was like, that doesn't make sense. There was a movie called Time Rider, where this guy on a motorcycle accidentally gets knocked back into the 19th century and meets his grandmother. And it had a lot of weird time travel tropes in it. He ends up becoming the man that got his grandmother pregnant before she went out to San Francisco looking for him. And she takes from him this medallion that eventually gets handed down to him as having belonged to his grandmother. It struck me immediately that this was so problematic that I was going to have to
do some loops.
That I was going to have to find a way to work with time travel that wasn't going to cause this kind of problem. And so I ended up creating a theory that worked for the first Back to the Future movie and for the first Terminator movie, and I went from there.
Nice. Do you think that so if in your theory, Back to the Future 1 and Terminator are both, I guess you would say, like they don't have issues like in terms of that?
We'll say they're possible. They both have problems, but they don't have insurmountable problems, if you catch the difference.
Okay. Right. So what would be a couple of those problems?
Well, with Back to the Future, you have the rather foolish circumstance that Marty's family is fading from the picture. If you think about that, there's never going to be a photograph of Marty and his sister and his big brother without his head. That photograph is never going to exist. There's no way Marty can have that in his wallet. Either his big brother is there in his entirety, or he's not, or there's no photograph. And they use this as a technique in Back to the Future to get the audience to understand that this is serious, that Marty may be undoing his existence. But if Marty undoes his existence, he will never know it. We'll get to the end of the time stream and he will just never be born.
Right. So it's kind of just a weird way of graphically representing a more philosophical issue.
Yes. The other thing is that when he gets home, he's surprised that his mother is thin and his father is playful and is publishing his book. This is not the family he left behind. And he just saw himself leave for the past. So the Marty who wakes up the next morning has to be the one that grew up in this house, not the one that grew up in the other house.
Right.
So
his memory is...
He should have the memory of the other house. He shouldn't be surprised at what he finds. So those are problems there. Now, with Terminator, you have a lot of issues because you have the Terminator being sent back and you have Kyle Reese being sent back. And the reason the Terminator is sent back is because Sarah Connor has a child who becomes a problem for Skynet. But Sarah Connor's child is Kyle Reese's son and would never have been born if the Terminator hadn't been sent back. So we have this anomaly up front, and the solution to it has to be that Sarah Connor met some guy that night and got pregnant, and her child became a problem for Skynet. So Skynet sent its best Terminator back, which wasn't the one we saw in the movie, because that would have killed her, but sent its best Terminator back to prevent the child from being born. She somehow escapes and the child is born, but then the Terminator, who is stupid, kills the mother. So in the future, the child sends back Kyle Reese to protect his mother, and Kyle interferes with her meeting with the other guy and becomes the replacement father, which means now we have Kyle Reese being born as Kyle. And I'm sorry, I'm screwing up the names. We have John Connor being born as John.
Right.
And the Terminator that comes back still manages to kill Sarah, but Kyle now sends back. John sends back Kyle again because he knows Kyle was sent back, and the Terminators, that Skynet is building better Terminators, but Kyle is getting more information, and the Terminator gets destroyed and provides more information to build a better Terminator. And so we have this escalating program until it reaches a maximum and is able to continue.
So it's kind of like there's like a loop. There's a first loop, which has certain bits of information, but as more pieces of information are added to the puzzle, the loop gets more complicated.
Right.
Okay, so those are two great examples, and I want to get into some more examples in a bit. But let's step back for a second and look at kind of the more theoretical side of it. So tell us about does your theory, well, first of all, I guess, is your theory consistent, and does it work across like a broad swath of movies, or might it even work in real life? So I guess kind of do what you want with those three questions there.
Well, okay. I would say the competing theories are fixed time and multiple dimension. Now, with fixed time theory, the notion is that you can't actually change anything. You can't change the past. And as I have pointed out more than once, that means you can't change the future either. We are all locked into this deterministic world in which, one of the lines I said is, I can't have not written this book, and you can't help having read it, and you can't even help whether or not you believe in fixed time. You either believe it because you believe it, or you don't believe it. And the problem with it is, why can't I go back into the past and do something that changes the future? And the fixed time people just say, because you can't. Because you didn't, and therefore you won't, and therefore you can't. And so I'm not comfortable with that.
Because that's equivalent to saying that anything that I do today can't impact something that might happen tomorrow, which is, of course, absurd.
Correct. The other multiple dimension theory, and there are several variants of how that works, but it essentially says when you go back in time, you're in a different universe. It looks exactly like yours, but either you just created a different universe or you moved to one that already existed and looked exactly like yours. Now, there are a lot of problems with this, but the big one in my mind is when you go forward in time, if you go back to your own universe, you've changed nothing. And if you go to the other universe, there are now two of you. Because there's the one who was born in this universe, and there's you who came from the other one. And
so the answer to that is you can't switch universes.
Now, you've gone to another universe, and you can't change your own past. You can change the past of someone else. And as I point out, it would never get that far, because the first thing they're going to do is they're going to get like a cube of carbon, some perfect element, and stick it in the time machine and send it to the past. And it's going to go to the other universe and never be recovered. And they're going to conclude this doesn't work. So no one is ever going to travel to the other universes because it doesn't work.
Right, because in the universe that I left, time travel was not possible or had never been done. So even if it's technically possible, the fact that it's never been done means that I will not come back on this timeline.
Right. Nobody will know. Okay. So my theory, which we're calling replacement theory, essentially says if you travel back in time, you can do whatever you want and you can change the past. But that's going to have consequences. And the kind of consequences are going to depend on what you changed. If you made it so that it is not possible for you to go back in time, well, then you've just undone everything that you changed. Because you're not going to come back in time and make those changes. And that gives us what I've dubbed an infinity loop. Essentially, we live through the original timeline. You go back to some point in the past, change the timeline, and we live through that timeline until you reach the point where you don't go back to the past, and you should have. So you don't arrive in the past and we're back to reliving the original timeline. And we just do that forever.
Okay. This is where it gets complicated. Okay, so is this... okay, so a lot of these experiments involve murdering people. So I'm gonna say that in this example, you're the guy who invents the time machine, and you send me back in time. But for whatever reason, I decide that I'm going to murder you as a child before you invent the time machine. Is that an example? It's like, what happens with that?
That is certainly an example, because now I'm never going to invent the time machine. And that means I'm never going to send you to the past. And you're not going to kill me. But if you don't kill me, we already know that I'm going to invent the time machine. And once I've done that, I'm going to send you to the past. And there's no reason, because we don't know what happened in the timeline that's been erased, there's no reason why you wouldn't kill me. So we have one timeline where I send you to the past, and the other in which you kill me so I don't send anybody to the past.
Okay, so we're talking about... It kind of brings us back to branching timelines then. So, but it's more of a loop. So that's like kind of like there's one side of the loop is in one universe and one side's in a different universe.
Yes. Well, it's like, well, we're making a recording right now. Yeah. And it would be possible since you're at the controls, for you to say, I don't like this part. Let's go back and re-record it. Back the recording up and record over what we just did. And
I might do that. That sounds fun.
and when you do that, you have created a situation in which there is still only one history, but it's the altered history. There's only one recording, but it's the new recording. Okay, so what's happening with our infinity loop is we have the original recording, and then we rewind the tape, and we do the changed recording. But because of the way time works, when we hit the end of that segment, the tape automatically rewinds to the original version, because we didn't choose to make the change, and that was a necessary part of the history of the new recording. So,
okay, so if I'm following your example, it's like the rewind button on my tape deck has a built-in copy function, so it's going to create two versions of this thing as it goes backwards.
Right, but only one version exists. It's just that
Okay.
which version exists depends on which one we just went through. And I get a lot of questions about, well, what happens after the end of the infinity loop? And the answer is absolutely nothing. Because
I see. We're going to keep going round and round, and it's going to flip-flop back and forth, but never coalesce into one or the other.
That's right.
Okay, so that's really like more of a quantum thing, where it's like, I mean, it's not quantum at all, but it's similar. That's really interesting. It's like an unstable circuit.
It is.
Yeah.
And you can also have the situation where you changed something that altered you in a way that when you go back, you do something differently. If you go back in time and tell yourself, don't do X,
right,
then you've created the situation where when you get to the point where you went back in time, if you don't go back in time, then you're not going to know not to do X. But if you say, I have to make sure I go back and tell myself, well, then you're going to go back and tell yourself, don't do X. But you're not the same person because you didn't do X when you lived through it. So you don't really know the consequences that your other self experienced. So you deliver the message a little differently. And that means that this third version of you gets the message a little differently. And he can't even ask you the question, well, why shouldn't I do that? Because all you know is what you were told. And this is going to repeat until either some version of you says, that's ridiculous, I'm not going to go back and tell myself, and we go back to the original history, or you manage to get it to the point where the version of you that goes back is exactly the same as the one who spoke to him.
Okay, so this is substantially different from Bill and Ted, because they're able to successfully pass messages back to their earlier selves.
Bill and Ted are just ridiculous, yeah. I think that,
well, of course.
And I think that to make Bill and Ted work, you have to assume that they managed to work things out and then in the future said, you know, this would have been easier if we had done X. And so they did it. I suppose the one would be they went to look for the key and the key wasn't there. And they said, well, this would have been so much easier if the key was there. But they managed to get past it anyway. And then they said, you know, if we'd had the key, we could have put it there and then we would have found it. And so they do that so that they will have the key, find the key when they go there. And
okay.
So they're kind of fixing things to make things easier for themselves.
Right. Okay. But in replacement theory, okay. So we've just scratched the surface of replacement theory, I think here, and so
yes.
you covered the infinite loop.
The infinity loop, and the second thing I was talking about was the sawtooth snap, where it keeps changing just a little, and then either resolves or goes back to the beginning. If it resolves, and it can resolve, if you, let's say, for example, you went back to your high school and you showed up and you told people that you were a new parent and you wanted to get a look at the school before you brought your kid here, and they let you look around and you didn't change anything, you didn't talk to yourself, you just looked at things and you left and you went back to the future. maybe you wanted to find out what happened on this particular day or something like that. But in the end, you come back to the present and you haven't changed a thing that would have impacted you, so that when the time comes, you will go back and do exactly the same thing. You have now changed the history from the original in which you weren't present to a new history in which you were present, but you haven't prevented yourself from doing exactly the same thing. So tomorrow you can get up and go on with life, with the past now including you visiting the high school. And that I call an end jump, because of the way it looks when you draw it on a piece of paper.
Oh, okay, yeah. But if I went back to my elementary school instead, and I saw myself getting beat up, and
you interfered, that would make a big difference.
I wouldn't have even done anything necessarily, but the fact that I saw that is going to change my later thinking, because I don't remember that happening, but I'm pretty sure it did. But I have no memory of it at all. So just the fact that I've refreshed my memory instead of blocking it from whatever trauma I've blocked.
Because the next version that goes back would now have that memory, and he would be a slightly different person, and we might have to go through a couple of versions before it stabilizes.
Okay. But in that case, it's not necessarily branching or looping.
Well, it's going to be a sawtooth snap, and either eventually you're going to be the same person going back as you were on the previous run, or you're not going to be able to. You're going to create an infinity loop where one or more pairs of timelines keep replacing each other.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, are there any examples in film or of these two phenomenon?
The problem with films is they almost always show you one single history, and you get these solutions by extrapolating how could this possibly have happened. There are exceptions. One, I think, a brilliantly done film is Source Code. If you haven't seen it, I apologize because I'm about to spoil it for you. But
okay, well, if you haven't seen it, then just stop the video here, and when we get back to the part where you should start watching, we're going to go like this. So even just mute it, and then we'll wave our hands when it's safe to come back. Okay.
In Source Code, the time traveler is actually a quadriplegic who is having his mind sent into the body of someone else. And he's been told that he's being sent into the past, and he's supposed to learn who the bomber is so that they can catch the bomber before his next bombing.
This is where he's on a train, right?
He's on a train. And what he actually discovers is that he's being sent into the body of a person in a parallel dimension. Exactly the same history up to this point. But he is able to prevent the bombing. And then in the end, he manages to communicate to the girl who's running him that the reason that explosion didn't occur is that they prevented it. That was something they managed to do, but that was in a different universe.
So he's the same guy, but also not, because in this universe he hasn't been injured.
No, he has been injured. when he prevents the bombing, he's in the body of someone else, and that raises a lot of questions, kind of the quantum leap questions. What happens to the person who you've just replaced?
Yeah.
And I know how they answer that in Quantum Leap, but I've seen an awful lot of Quantum Leap-like stories in which they take over somebody's body and they don't explain what happens to the person whose body they took over.
Right.
But
Well, are they almost kind of implying that there's only one mind that your multiple bodies can share? I don't know. It's a weird way. It's strange.
it's not clear what they're doing at this point, but yeah. And the movie's not perfect, but it just bowled me over when I realized what had happened, because I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that's great about. I mean, I guess this is one of the reasons why this genre is so popular, is that it leaves lots of room for these kind of twists that are like sometimes just really mind blowing.
Right. You in Back to the Future 2, you see them talking about divergent dimension theory, where since Biff went back in time and changed time, they can't get into the original history unless they go back that far. And there are a lot of problems with that movie temporally.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I like that idea that, if you're going back to a branch, you have to go back to before the branch. That part of it makes sense to me. But then there's a lot of other things where you got to wonder what's actually happening.
Right. I mean, if it did branch and you went back before the branch, when you hit the branch, which universe would you be in?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or even, shoot, because as soon as you go back, you've made a new branch.
Correct.
Yeah.
And because you are back before the other branch, the question then becomes, is the time travel going to land in your branch also? And do we now have...
Maybe that branch doesn't exist. Yeah, that's a little bit weird. So you could go back to before the branch happened, and therefore that branch never branched. So there is no branch to prevent. Oh, crazy. Was there another part of the theory?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of little nuances, things that I learned over the decades. There were a couple of movies that called my attention to what I call the genetic problem. We can look at Back to the Future Part 1. Marty McFly shows up, and suddenly he's the heartthrob of everybody. I mean, we focus on Lorraine, but everybody thinks he's a dream. How many relationships broke up because these girls were fawning over Marty McFly, or Calvin Klein, as they were calling him? How many children from the next generation were never born because those couples didn't get married? And when they married somebody else instead, what happened to the intended spouses, the original spouses of those spouses? We've got a major change in the population of probably this entire state, because couples broke up due to the presence of Marty, and he didn't even try to go out with anybody. He didn't try to get anybody to like him. He tried to get.
If he had been dating, it would have been even crazier.
He tried to get Lorraine to like his dad, so that he would be born. It just and there are a lot of movies where that's an issue that they just never address.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, even if things are different, the human nature, let's say, or the assumptions and beliefs and the like habitual behaviors of all the characters, all the NPCs in the world around them are consistent, presumably, because nothing has changed them. But the fact that, like you said, the fact that Calvin Klein is now in town, that does change a lot of things, and you could sort of, if you were able to hit the pause button and then just go through and look at each person in a scene. Let's say at the high school dance where Marty's playing his guitar, there's a couple hundred kids in there dancing, and if you were to hit that pause button right there and we're able to like go and examine their faces or even get into their minds at that point, the repercussions are mind-boggling.
Indeed, and that's really a simple example. I have a problem with the Terminator series, and it's a kind of a weird problem, but it has to do with the fact that Kyle Reese has to have been born sometime after John Connor. But Judgment Day got moved 7 years. And if Kyle was born before the first Judgment Day, then he's really the same age as John Connor. But if he was born any time later than that, because the population of the world has been so drastically changed by this nuclear war, it's going to matter exactly when Kyle was born and who his parents were. And the shift of 7 years is going to mean he's probably going to have different parents in some versions of history than in others. You can't have the same person born in two so entirely different worlds.
Right. Okay. Man, this is crazy stuff. Okay, so what about
go ahead.
Let's talk about 12 Monkeys.
Oh, the first time I watched 12 Monkeys, my reaction was, I have never before seen a perfect time travel movie. I'm not sure that it is perfect. It does have a few glitches in it. But it is an incredible movie. It's one of 3 time travel movies that Bruce Willis made, and it is probably the best.
What are the other 2?
Well, one of them is this Disney thing. I think it's called The Kid. It's a really weird thing where he keeps going to a diner and meeting himself when he's a kid, and he's also flying around in an airplane as a much older man. It's a convoluted movie, and you wonder why Disney made it. but it's there. The other is Looper, where
yeah.
he's the assassin who, when you have finished your run, they strap you with a payment in gold and send you back to be your own last victim. And
Right.
so, and he manages to escape and go on the run.
Right. That whole assassin, where you're your own assassin thing, I think that's such an awesome. I mean, it's a bit of a trope, I guess now, but I really like it. And probably the most convoluted one that I can think of is well, the movie that they made was called Predestination, but it's based on Robert Heinlein short story.
Oh, yes, the one in which he turns out to be hermaphrodite, and he changes from being a woman to being a man, and it's. I've got an analysis of that on the website, and I can make it work, but it requires an awful lot of really lucky coincidences.
Yeah, well, totally. I mean, I think does time travel always require coincidences, or is it just sort of the way it seems when we're watching, because we're only seeing one side of the story?
I think you can have a successful time travel situation in which everything works as planned. It doesn't make a good story.
Yeah, I guess that's...
I have a story. It's in the book, I think. Yes, it's in the book, and it's on the web. It's called The Perpetual Barbecue.
Right.
And it essentially is a retired scientist who has invented a time machine and realizes that at this point it's only a matter of time before someone destroys time. So he wants to do it in a controlled situation where everyone is going to live the last day of their life in a beautiful and happy setting and do it over and over and over for eternity. And so that's what he plans, and something goes wrong. So that he ends up with this infinity loop where everyone lives one beautifully perfect day, followed by one day in which everything is horrible from the beginning to the end. And then back to the beautifully perfect one. And of course, they never remember the other day.
Yeah, which I think is fascinating. And you wrote that story, right?
In fact, I wrote it back when I was working on Multiverser. It's in the Multiverser Referees Rules as part of it's in the second book of Worlds as part of a playable game that you can drop a player character into and let him try to figure out what the heck is going on.
Amazing. So he was planning on making a sawtooth.
He was planning on making an infinity loop. The difference between the two, the difference between the two was supposed to be that in the first timeline, he would go to the picnic and he would make sure everybody had a good time, that everything worked out, and then at the end of the day, he would go home to his time machine, and he would go back to the beginning of the day before the picnic began, and he would go down to the park where he would find himself, who knows what the plan is but doesn't know which side of the loop he's on, and he would shoot himself and hide the body in the lake, figuring it would never be found because there's only the rest of the day.
No time.
And then he would go to the picnic and repeat everything he did, so that he would have the same outcome, the same wonderful day for all the residents. But he has a heart attack and dies by the lake, so he's not there.
Right.
And we see in the unfolding of the two timelines how very little things that he does prevent huge disasters from happening. Somebody stops to talk to him just before crossing the street to go to the ball game and doesn't get hit by a car. Things like that. The lifeguard is up trying to save somebody who shouldn't have been injured, while some drunk guy falls in the lake and drowns. And it's just filled with all these. Even little things like when everybody was looking forward to somebody's potato salad and he suggests, well, I'll bet you can scrounge up everything you need to make the potato salad right here. And they do. So they all enjoy the potato salad on the good day.
Yeah.
But he's not.
That's hilarious.
I
forgot. It's been a while since I read this story, but it's so great. Like all these little things. That's really cool. For my listeners, it's worth buying this book just for this short story. But the book also explores all of these other movies that we're talking about, and Mark gets really into some of the details as to why things work and why things don't work and stuff like that. So if you're enjoying this conversation, this book is like it, but way better because it's in writing and you can follow it easier. I'm having a hard time following. I always have a hard time following stuff where it's so complicated. But you have to remember.
Let me also say, all of this is on the website, but the website's got close to 1,000 pages, and trying to get through them all and understand everything, the book is much more concise. Now, what the book doesn't have is 100 movies that are on the website. But if you're interested in a particular movie, you can go look it up on the website. We've got the Butterfly Effect movies. We've got the previously mentioned Predestination. We've got movies you've never heard of. There's a wonderful movie called 10 Minutes Ago that I absolutely love. There's a...
You got Donnie Darko on there?
I have both of the Darko movies. They are crazy, but they are not unresolvable.
Right. Every time I watch one of those, I always think, oh, tomorrow I got to watch that, and then I got to watch the other one, and then this one again. And it doesn't matter which one I watch, but I always think that I got to watch the other one and then this one again.
Yeah, one of the reasons
had a chance.
One of the reasons for that is that the two movies are not consistent with each other in their temporal theory. You feel like if I understand this movie, I should understand that one, but they're not the same. You get that with the Terminator movies. There are a lot of people who argue that Terminator 2 is not really canon because it doesn't follow the same theory as the original Terminator movie. but they're arguing that the original Terminator movie has to be fixed time, and Terminator 2 can't be.
Wow.
And I say, go ahead.
Well, just like what? How do you resolve that yourself, or what do you think about that?
I have a very complicated way of resolving Terminator 2, but essentially, Sarah Connor manages to change time, but it has consequences, and in the future, people have to take actions to make sure that that happens. And we also, there's something that we kind of miss when I did the analysis of the original Terminator movie. I noted that Cyberdyne is credited with having created Skynet, but Skynet must have been created by someone else at a later date originally. And when they got hold of the parts of the Terminator, they managed to jump in and take the project away from the original creator. When they released Terminator 3, we found out who the original creator was. It was the Air Force, Cyber Weapons Division.
Oh.
They were the original creator of Skynet, and we see how they did it. But once they did it, Skynet was created and sent a Terminator back to try to stop John Connor by killing Sarah Connor. And that resulted in the Terminator being destroyed at Cyberdyne and Cyberdyne taking over the Skynet project.
Okay.
So,
sheesh. Okay. Here's weird.
So in Terminator 2, when Sarah interferes, she sends it back to the original creation in Terminator 3.
Okay. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so I have this weird feeling, because it's not really a theory, because I can't explain why, but I feel like the Alien franchise is somehow a time travel story, but it isn't, but it feels like one to me, because maybe just because I've spent so much time thinking about the timeline over the thousands of years that it covers.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that I saw the first two movies, and it was really,
that's fair.
And it's kind of weird because I read about Alien in Omni magazine before it came out, and I was really looking forward to it. But I don't watch horror movies. And when the ads came on, and do you remember what the advertising slogan was for Alien?
Oh, in space, no one can hear you scream?
That's exactly what it was. And I was like, it's a horror movie. And I was very disappointed. And I didn't watch it. And it ran through the theaters, and I didn't watch it. And it was on HBO, and I had HBO, and I didn't watch it. And then one of my best gaming buddies called me up and said, look, Alien is going to be on HBO one more time. Would you tape it for me? And I was like, Alien? That's a horror movie. He was like, no, it's a great science fiction movie. You haven't seen it? You got to watch it. So I recorded it for him, and I watched it, and I was like, that's a great science fiction movie.
It is. It's also a horror movie. But the funny thing about that whole franchise is that each... so there's like what? I mean, depending on how you count, which ones are canonical or not. But I'm going to say there's maybe 9 movies that I feel are canonical. Every one of them is a different genre. So you've got the first one's a horror. The second one is an action flick. The third one is kind of a Western almost. the third one is back to sci-fi. Like, and they're all different. So and that's, I think, a really interesting thing about it is that of all the sci-fi franchises, Aliens might be the one where there's the most disagreement about which movies are great and which ones suck. But it's entertaining having these conversations.
Star Trek.
Well, Star Trek.
I remember I had a friend who loved the original Star Trek series.
Yeah.
And he had watched the first 4 movies and he loved them. And he hates science fiction.
Okay.
But the thing about the Star Trek show was he loved the interactions between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. The character interactions was what sold him on it. And somehow, with all improbability, I got to see Star Trek V before he did. I was talking to him on the phone about it, and I said, "Have you seen it?" And he said, "No, I was thinking of not watching it because I heard it's really, really bad." And I said, "You know, with what I know about what you like about Star Trek, you will like this movie."
Right.
So he went and watched it, and he came back, and I said, "Was it good?" He said, "It's the best one so far." Now, everybody hates that movie except David. David thinks it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he ever saw the others after that, but he thought that was a great movie. And I have to agree with him. If you like the Kirk, Spock, McCoy, the character interactions that comprise the original crew, that's a brilliantly done movie. And Shatner deserves a lot more respect for it than he gets. Now,
yeah, I agree. I think Shatner's awesome. So, are there any other movies that you consider to be time travel movies that aren't typically thought of as time travel movies?
oh wow. I almost wish I had the list in front of me, but I don't want to interrupt your.
No, that's fine. If you don't, if you can't, if nothing comes to mind, that's fine. It was just more of a curious thing because, like, I do find it interesting that, people can watch a movie and get something completely different out of it.
I've had people tell me that movies that I analyzed as time travel movies weren't. The one that comes to mind is Triangle, which is definitely a horror thing. The woman, just really briefly, the woman is on this boat ride and they get lost at sea and they come to this ocean liner and they go on board and there's nobody there and there's food rotting in the dining room and the next thing they know, somebody's killing them.
Right, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah,
it's got a lot of temporal loop stuff going on in it, and it's got a lot of problems. But when I wrote it up, I got a letter from somebody who said, "This woman is not caught in a time loop; she's in hell."
I mean, that's maybe that's a way to define hell, right? I mean, like the infinite loop thing.
Yeah,
infinity loop is.
If you've ever watched Lucifer, the concept of hell they have there is people who are reliving the moment of their greatest guilt over and over and over again because they can't forgive themselves and get past it.
Right.
And
one version of hell might be just Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, where it's the same boring day over and over again.
Okay. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie 1201.
I'm not sure.
It's kid gets an electric shock just as he's going to bed around midnight, and when he goes to work the next morning, it's yesterday. And
Oh yeah.
and this keeps happening to him, that it's always the same day repeating, and he's trying to figure out why. And it turns out that his company is working on this machine, and it accidentally broke time and sent them into a loop, and he's trying to prevent it from happening now.
Okay.
My reason for mentioning it is I'm persuaded that happened on Groundhog Day.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
And this kid and Bill Murray are the only two people who didn't get caught in the loop.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple other ones like that where I can't remember. There's this, a map of tiny small things or something like that. And that, okay, actually, that reminds me. There's this old Sandra Bullock film. I can't remember what it's called, where basically she wakes up and her husband ends up dying. You seen this one?
Yes. And I keep confusing the title with Predestination. It's like
yeah, exactly. It's got a one-word title.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what's happening there? Because we're seeing it's almost as if they filmed the whole movie and then they just took each. It's really kind of like they just did it in editing, where they just changed the order of the days.
Yeah, we're seeing fragments of two different histories, and
is it two? Or is it all this? Is it the same thing?
There's
remember.
There's one history in which he is alive, and another history in which he is dead. And when she wakes up in the morning, she doesn't know which history she's in, and so it's confusing. And she's also living the days out of sequence.
Yeah, so it's super confusing to watch.
It is.
The whole sequence thing is interesting. Another one like that is the Memento, where the guy gets all the tattoos to remind himself what he's already done. But the whole movie is shot in reverse sequence.
Okay, but it's not a time travel movie.
I guess it isn't really. It seems like it is, but I guess it's not, because it's really just about memory. It's about he has amnesia. This is really the only explanation for it. But yeah, there's just so many different ways that you can mess with time, I guess.
Indeed.
So I guess we are kind of running out of time, but let's just go for one last question. What is if you had to pick your favorite time travel movie, what would that be?
I would be hard-pressed not to say 10 Minutes Ago, because it is such a delightful movie, and with a little work, you can make everything in it work. And I don't know if you've seen it.
I don't know. I'm really bad with titles. I forget what I've seen and not.
This guy from half a century in the future lives in a time when the world is dying, and they say that they need samples of the atmosphere from 50 years ago so that they can match the atmosphere in the future to what it should be. And he has just become the first person to invent the time machine. And he travels back to his apartment. He travels, not a time and space machine. He's got it in his bathroom, and he travels back to his bathroom 50 years ago, same apartment, and he's met by a television crew saying, welcome first time traveler from the future.
What?
And he's like, wait a minute. How do you know? I said, oh, you've been here before. And he said, why would I ever have been here before? I'm just here to collect some air. And he walks out into the other room and he's got his bottles and he's collecting. I'm going back to the future. I can only stay here for 11 minutes and then I got to leave or I'm stuck here. And they say, no, but you've been here quite a few times during the night. And we've been waiting for you to get here for this, your first arrival. And I said, why would I ever come back? And then this girl comes up and says, I'm still thinking about that question you asked me. And he stares at her like, uh-oh. And so he leaves, but he has apparently arrived during someone's bridal reception, wedding reception, that got moved to the apartment because of weather. And he goes through the entire 2-hour reception in 11-minute intervals out of sequence. He gets to know this girl and falls in love with her, and there are a lot of little wild tropes throughout it. It's a really fun, lighthearted, enjoyable movie. Well worth seeing.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I got to check that out. Well, yeah. So hey, it was great to talk to you, Mark. Again, here's Mark's book. I'm going to put it up on the screen. It's The Essential Guide to Time Travel. And I can't read it from where I am. What's the subtitle there? Something about everything you need to know before you go.
Temporal anomalies and replacement theory. I was just moving back so that I would vanish from the screen, but I can't see the bottom anyway.
There you go. I thought you were ghosting me. But yeah, so thanks again, Mark, and I'm sure we'll chat again sometime. But yeah, check out his book, everybody.
Yeah, and I have a bunch of other books. Maybe Ken and I can talk about them sometime. But this is the big time travel one.
Lots of books to talk about. Yeah. Mark writes about time travel, but also about role-playing games, and also about Christianity and theology and all kinds of interesting and fascinating topics. And so go check out his website, mjyoung.net. Is that right?
That's it.
And definitely check out his books. They are on Amazon under the name Mark Joseph Young. Okay, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye, Ken.